In the shadows of history's most violent century, there are corridors we were never meant to walk. Beneath the rubble of cities and the silence of sealed vaults lies a record of what men will do when war strips away the last light of conscience. These are not just forgotten battles, but buried designs, scraps of paper and steel that whisper of power too dangerous to name, and of hands that would never let it go. On the night of April 17, 1945, at 22:43 hours, an Allied signals team operating out of the British 8th Corps listening post in Liège intercepted an unusually garbled Enigma transmission. The ciphered text, once partially decrypted by Hut 6 at Bletchley Park, referenced Unternehmen Valkyrie Schwarz, Valkyrie Black, and an Object 27 scheduled for immediate lockdown. The message originated from a German army field station outside Dresden, relayed through a repeater believed to be in occupied Czechoslovakia. Allied intelligence had no prior record of Object 27. It did not appear in any Wehrmacht procurement list, research registry, or known weapons inventory. However, the urgency of the transmission, combined with its highest-level encryption class, suggested something of considerable value, or danger. Within 24 hours, SHAEF, Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, issued an emergency directive to locate and secure the site before Soviet forces advanced too far west. A joint American-British recovery detachment, codenamed Talbot II, was assembled under the command of Major William R. Halford, U.S. Army OSS liaison to the British SOE. The team consisted of 12 operatives, 6 from the U.S. 30th Infantry Division's Intelligence Section, 4 from SOE's Section 5, Counterespionage, and 2 Royal Engineers demolition specialists. They were equipped with standard-issue small arms, C3 explosives, and enough rations for 7 days. Their orders were explicit: locate Object 27 in the Sudeten Mountains, secure any documents or equipment, and if removal was impossible, destroy the facility. Talbot II crossed into the eastern foothills of the Sudetenland on April 24, moving under the cover of an advancing U.S. armored column. By April 26, they reached the small village of Kowarska, now largely deserted except for a handful of elderly civilians. Locals spoke of recent German convoys heading into the mountains, escorted by Waffen-SS units. One elderly man, a retired railway worker, claimed he had seen trucks marked with the emblem of the Heereswaffenamt, Army Ordnance Office, vanish up an unmarked logging road 2 weeks earlier. On April 28, Talbot II located the site, a heavy steel blast door embedded in the base of a rocky escarpment, partially camouflaged with netting and pine branches. The entrance showed signs of recent welding. Seams were fused in thick bead patterns consistent with internal sealing. The immediate perimeter was strewn with burned paper fragments, many bearing charred fragments of the Reichsadler stamp. The only legible scrap was a half-melted metal identification plate stamped Object 27, Prufstel D. Major Halford ordered the Royal Engineers to breach the door, but after 6 hours of cutting torches and explosives, the team discovered that a secondary inner barrier of reinforced concrete blocked the tunnel. The decision was made to set demolition charges. At 3:12 hours on April 29, the charges detonated and revealed only a collapsed interior shaft leading into solid rubble. The air smelled faintly of chemical accelerants, as though the interior had been deliberately burned or sabotaged before sealing. Halford's report, filed to OSS London on May 2, noted a troubling discovery: evidence of prior excavation. In the debris just inside the barrier, they found cigarette butts of a brand manufactured in New York, a torn khaki sleeve patch consistent with U.S. Army uniforms, and a crumpled, mud-stained ration wrapper labeled Field Ration C, with a lot code corresponding to shipments sent to Patton's Third Army. Yet no Allied unit was known to have operated in this area before Talbot II. Talbot II withdrew on May 3 as Soviet vanguards moved within 10 kilometers. Halford's final communication from Kowarska recorded a Soviet radio chatter intercept, a Red Army engineering unit referring to the same location as Z-27, and reporting it as already cleared. What they meant by cleared was never determined. For decades, Object 27 remained a rumor in post-war intelligence circles. Officially, SHAEF records list the operation as unproductive and the site as non-strategic. In 1972, A retired SOE cryptanalyst named Harold McCullen leaked a classified annex to the BBC's investigative unit. The annex contained a single page, a requisition form dated February 3, 1945, from the Reich Ministry of Armaments, requesting the urgent transfer of prismatic assemblies to Object 27 under seal, with delivery supervised by SS Obergruppenführer Hans Kammler, the man notorious for overseeing the V weapons program. Further research in the British National Archives, declassified in 1999, revealed an MI6 memorandum from 1964 summarizing a Valkyrie black debrief. The document, heavily redacted, mentioned that an unidentified third party had accessed the site weeks before Talbot II arrived, removing all primary material. The report's classification level was listed as cosmic top secret, typically reserved for NATO's most sensitive intelligence. When Halford was interviewed in 1981 by a private historian, he broke from his usual reticence. "We weren't the first ones there," he said. "And I don't think the Soviets were, either. Someone knew exactly what was in that bunker, and they got it out before anyone could lay claim. The welding, that wasn't for security. That was to make sure no one went back in." The location of Object 27 today is overgrown and unmarked. Satellite imagery shows little more than a moss-covered rock face where the steel doors once stood. No surviving members of Talbot II are alive to provide testimony. Of the files that once documented Valkyrie Black, only fragments remain, but one entry from an MI6 registry of missing wartime artifacts contains a final note beside the Object 27 designation: recovered, status unresolved, custody unknown. On the humid night of July 14, 1952, a man calling himself Anton Weber crossed into the American sector of West Berlin at checkpoint Marienborn. His civilian clothes were worn, his hands trembled from exhaustion, and a battered aluminum briefcase was chained to his left wrist. Speaking in accented German, he claimed to be a former scientist with the Soviet Academy of Sciences, but his papers, upon closer examination by U.S. Counterintelligence Corps (CIC) officers, revealed a deeper wartime history. His real name was Dr. Dieter Kranz, formerly attached to the Reich's Biologisk Abteilung 12, a department believed destroyed during the 1944 Allied bombing of Frankfurt am Main. Kranz's briefcase, once inspected inside a secure holding room at the CIA's Berlin base, contained 6 microfilm reels sealed in wax and labeled Operation Morgenlicht. Each reel was accompanied by a folded sheet of typewritten notes in German military courier format, dated between March and October 1944. The contents, quickly translated by an on-site interpreter, described a biological warfare program centered on weaponized rickettsia and tularemia, allegedly tested in occupied eastern Poland on both livestock and human subjects. The documents further claimed that, in the last months of the war, several Morgenlicht scientists had been extracted by advancing Soviet forces, not captured, but willingly transferred under a prearranged agreement. Initial CIA analysis suggested that both the United States and the USSR might have integrated Morgenlicht personnel into post-war research. This possibility was explosive. If confirmed, it would mean that both Cold War superpowers had knowingly harbored former Nazi war criminals in exchange for classified biomedical knowledge, in direct violation of Allied agreements on war crimes prosecution. Kranz insisted on debriefing with American intelligence only, claiming his life would be in danger if the British were informed. He named 2 other surviving Morgenlicht scientists, Dr. Klaus Ritter, allegedly living under a false identity in Buenos Aires, and Dr. Emil Hartmann, working in a Soviet military research facility in Novosibirsk. According to Kranz, Morgenlicht's final phase, codenamed Silberregen, Silver Rain, was never carried out, but its prototypes and field data were intact as of April 1945. On July 15 at 21:10 hours, less than 24 hours after his arrival, Kranz was moved to a CIA safehouse in Dahlem for extended questioning. That night, Berlin base transmitted an encrypted priority cable to Langley requesting immediate extraction of both Kranz and the Morgenlicht reels to the United States. The request was acknowledged. A C-54 Skymaster was scheduled to depart Tempelhof Air Base at 5:30 on July 17. At 3:15 on July 16, the Safehouse Guard detail reported a power outage lasting approximately 4 minutes. When the emergency lighting engaged, Krantz was missing from his locked second-floor room. The window was still bolted, the door showed no forced entry, and the case containing the reels remained on the bed, untouched. A search of the premises turned up nothing except for a single Polaroid photograph lying inside the open briefcase. The image showed a small rural airstrip, flanked by palm trees, with a single twin-engine transport aircraft on the dirt runway. A handwritten notation on the reverse read, El Palomar, 1948. The disappearance triggered an immediate security lockdown. CIC officers combed the surrounding streets within an hour, but no witnesses saw Krantz leave. Berlin base reported no Soviet activity in the vicinity, and the West Berlin police had no arrests matching his description. There were no signs of forced removal, struggle, or even hasty departure. The lock on his wrist chain had been opened with a key, not broken. Within weeks, the incident was buried under layers of classification. The Morgenlicht reels were shipped to Langley under diplomatic pouch, where they were analyzed by Fort Detrick's Special Operations Division. Their findings, still partially redacted in surviving documents, confirmed that the program had been far more advanced than Allied intelligence had realized in 1945. A 1963 CIA memorandum on Morgenlicht legacy material described experimental outcomes incompatible with naturally occurring pathogenic behavior, but omitted any reference to the program's personnel. Krantz's name surfaced only once more in official channels, in a 1958 BND, West German Federal Intelligence Service, field report. The document, marked streng geheim, referenced an informant in Córdoba province, Argentina, claiming to have met a German doctor matching Krantz's description at a private hunting estate used by former Reich expatriates. The informant alleged that the man spoke fluent Russian, carried a Soviet-issue sidearm, and was addressed by others as her doctor. When BND operatives attempted to follow up, the trail went cold. The estate had been vacated, and its ownership records destroyed in a suspicious fire. In 1975, a declassification review inadvertently released a heavily censored CIA cable from Berlin base to the Department of State, dated July 19, 1952. The final two sentences, unredacted due to clerical oversight, read, Krantz's removal from Dahlem appears controlled and precise, suggesting a third-party operation. Identity of extractors unknown. Destination possibly extra-European. The airstrip in the Polaroid, El Palomar, still exists, a military facility outside Buenos Aires. Officially, it has no documented connection to post-war Nazi activity. Unofficially, Argentine archival researchers have uncovered customs records from the late 1940s showing unregistered cargo flights from European departure points, flights with no passenger manifests and cargo designations marked only as technological material. Krantz's fate remains unresolved. Whether he defected, was abducted, or was retrieved by former colleagues from a network that transcended both Iron Curtain and Atlantic Divide, the trail ends with that grainy Polaroid and the unanswerable question of who wanted him gone, and why the briefcase, with its damning contents, was deliberately left behind. On September 2, 1951, during a routine aerial reconnaissance sweep over the Sea of Japan, a Lockheed P-2V Neptune of U.S. Navy Patrol Squadron VP-6 captured a series of high-resolution photographs of a partially submerged vessel approximately 14 nautical miles off the coast of the Russian-administered Kuril Islands. The object's silhouette matched no known Soviet or Japanese hull configuration but bore striking resemblance to late-war German Type 9 U-boats. Naval intelligence analysts, reviewing the imagery at Yokosuka Naval Base, noted the faint but discernible outline of a Reich Sadler emblem still visible beneath marine growth along the conning tower. The following day, 7th Fleet Command authorized a discreet survey mission. The USS Greenlit, ASR-10, a submarine rescue vessel, departed Yokosuka with a team of Navy divers from Underwater Demolition Team 5, UDT-5, and a contingent from the Office of Naval Intelligence's Far East Field Office. On September 6, the team reached the coordinates recorded by the Neptune crew. The water was shallow, just 38 meters deep, and the wreck's forward section protruded from the silt at a sharp angle, as though deliberately grounded. Divers reported the hull markings for Abteilung 13, stenciled in faded white paint along a row of steel cargo crates lashed to the deck aft of the conning tower. Abteilung 13, Department 13, had never appeared in any known Kriegsmarine registry. Some of the crates were partially open, revealing cylindrical canisters sealed in heavy wax and stamped with serial numbers beginning E7/44. None of the crew quarters contained remains, suggesting the vessel had been abandoned, not sunk in combat. As the divers prepared to rig the first crate for hoist, a pair of Soviet patrol craft approached from the north. Their presence so close to Japanese waters triggered an immediate recall order from 7th Fleet Command, transmitted in plain language to avoid suspicion. By the time the USS Greenland and its escorts withdrew, the Soviet vessels had closed within visual range. The last sight recorded by Navy binoculars was a team of Soviet divers entering the water near the wreck. For reasons never publicly explained, the U.S. did not return to the site. Instead, all photographic records of the wreck were classified top secret, Navy eyes only, and archived at Pearl Harbor's Fleet Intelligence Center. The official 7th Fleet log entry for September 6 lists the operation simply as training exercise, cancelled due to foreign interference. It wasn't until 1978, during a Freedom of Information Act request by a maritime historian, that partial details resurfaced. Two declassified images from the original Neptune overflight showed the crates in sharp relief, with their stenciled markings clearly legible. A notation in the margin of one print, likely added by an ONI analyst, read, "Match to late, 44 manifests from Kiel Naval Arsenal. Cargo destination listed as Harbin." Harbin, in Japanese-occupied Manchuria, was a hub for Unit 731, the Imperial Japanese Army's Biological Warfare Research Center. The implication was unsettling. The German U-boat may have been delivering materials to the Japanese under the terms of the Axis Alliance's technology exchange agreements, even in the closing months of the war. The wax-sealed canisters, if biological in nature, could explain the urgency with which the Soviets moved to secure them. The most disturbing detail emerged from a handwritten memo found misfiled in the ONI Far East Field Office Archive, dated September 18, 1951. It summarized a verbal account from a Japanese fisherman who claimed to have seen two ships at the site. The smaller, a gray vessel with a low profile, matching the Soviet patrol craft, and the larger, a rusted submarine hull. According to the fisherman, the submarine floated again 2 days after the U.S. ships left, towed by the gray vessel toward the north. No such movement was ever recorded on U.S. or Japanese naval radar. In the decades since, Soviet naval records from the early Cold War remain inaccessible to researchers. No confirmed sighting of the U-boat or its cargo has been reported after 1951. The designation Abteilung 13 does not appear in surviving German military or industrial archives, though some scholars believe it may have been a cover term for clandestine weapons transfer operations outside the scope of normal Kriegsmarine command. By the late 1980s, oral accounts from retired Soviet divers began to circulate through émigré communities in Canada and Israel. One diver, speaking anonymously to a journalist in 1987, claimed that the German boat near Aturup had contained cargo too dangerous to keep, so it was sent to the mountains. When pressed on what dangerous meant, the diver replied only, "It was not a weapon you could aim, it was a weapon you could feed." Today, the exact coordinates logged by VPSIX's reconnaissance crew remain redacted in U.S. Navy archives. The shallow seafloor of the southern Kuriles has been extensively mapped by commercial fishing sonar, yet no wreck matching a Type 9 profile has been reported. Either the wreck was dismantled and removed entirely, or it lies buried under decades of shifting silt. In either case, the fate of the Abteilung 13 cargo, and the purpose of its delivery route across 2 oceans at the war's end, remains sealed in a silence as deep as the waters where it was first found. On April 3, 1944, a 2-page report arrived at the British Special Operations Executive, SOE, Warsaw desk via encrypted radio from an underground Armia Krajowa, Home Army, cell operating in the Radom district. The message, transmitted under the field code Griffin 8, described a heavily guarded Wehrmacht convoy moving east along Route 7 toward the Vistula River. Its cargo, 14 sealed lead cylinders loaded onto 2 Opel Blitz trucks, escorted by a mixed unit of Waffen-SS and Luftwaffe Feldgendarmerie. The convoy's manifest, briefly examined by a bribed Polish railway worker at a fuel stop in Skarżysko-Kamienna, listed the shipment as Wotan, Lieferung for Wotan, Delivery 4. XIII had no standing file on Wotan. A search of captured Abwehr and Wehrmacht documents yielded only one tangential reference, a January 1944 memo from the Heereswaffenamt to SS Obergruppenführer Hans Kammler's office, marked Nur durch Courier, Courier only, approving the transfer of an unspecified optische Anlage, optical apparatus, to an experimental station in Lower Silesia. The cryptic nature of both the manifest and the memo suggested the cylinders were not conventional munitions. On April 6, the convoy crossed into the rural district near Maków, where British-trained XIII, the silent, unseen operatives had prepared an ambush. At 2:17 hours, as the truck slowed on a narrow bridge over the Orzik River, concealed demolition charges detonated beneath the lead vehicle. Automatic fire erupted from both banks, killing 2 of the SS escorts instantly. But within minutes, a Luftwaffe Fieseler Storch reconnaissance plane circled overhead, and return fire from the remaining escorts forced the resistance to withdraw. The surviving truck accelerated out of the kill zone, lead cylinders still secured under tarpaulin, and disappeared eastward toward German-controlled territory. Witness accounts from the ambush site described an unnerving detail. During the brief firefight, one of the lead cylinders was damaged, its outer casing dented. According to a Home Army fighter interviewed after the war, a strange high-pitched resonance emanated from the cylinder when struck by a stray bullet. Not metallic ringing, but a faint, sustained tone like the vibration of glass under a finger. The fighter also claimed the nearest SS guard, who had been crouched beside the cylinder, stumbled and fired wildly at empty air before collapsing and convulsing on the ground. The Germans dragged his limp body onto the departing truck. Post-war interrogation of captured Wehrmacht logistics officers yielded no admissions about Wotan. Several insisted it was a code name for a radio-based navigation system, an explanation inconsistent with the physical description of the cargo. One officer, when pressed, muttered that Wotan was not for the front. It was for the eyes, before refusing further comment. The only surviving SOE cable on the incident, archived in Profile HS6 of 243 and partially declassified in 1979, included a heavily redacted section noting that intelligence from Polish field sources suggests Wotan is related to controlled perceptual phenomena. The cable's author, Lieutenant Colonel R. Haversham, recommended total interdiction of any surviving material before Soviet acquisition, but no follow-up report exists in the public record. Curiously, in the months following the Maków incident, a pattern emerged among captured German officers held at POW Camp No. 165 in Caithness, Scotland, a facility used for high-value detainees. Camp medical logs, declassified in 2004, describe at least 7 cases of recurring hallucinations in which prisoners reported seeing the same corridor, or a tunnel of light, in vivid detail, often while fully awake. The descriptions were remarkably consistent across subjects, despite the officers being held in isolation and coming from unrelated units. The hallucinations ceased after several weeks, but medical staff noted a residual disorientation in time perception among those affected. Some historians have speculated that Wotan was part of a late-war German attempt to weaponize visual or cognitive interference, possibly as a countermeasure against enemy pilots or artillery spotters. The lead cylinders may have contained optical elements, projection systems, or even chemical agents designed to induce perceptual distortion. Others argue that Wotan could have been a classified SS research project drawing from looted scientific work in occupied France, where experimental optics programs were known to exist at the University of Strasbourg. The Soviet archives, as far as they are accessible, are silent on Wotan. Notably, the convoy's last known route after Maków would have led it toward the rail junction at Mlawa, a key transit point for shipments to the Wolfslair headquarters in East Prussia, which the Red Army overran in January 1945. If the cylinders reached East Prussia, they may have been evacuated with other high-priority material in the chaotic final weeks of the war. In 1991, following the dissolution of the Soviet Union, a former GRU officer approached a Polish investigative journalist with an unverified account. The officer claimed that in 1946, Soviet engineers in Kaliningrad tested a captured German optical apparatus that caused subjects to report vivid, identical visual experiences, but that prolonged exposure led to seizures, blindness, or death. The apparatus was allegedly dismantled, its components buried in sealed drums near Lake Ladoga. No corroborating evidence has been found. Today, no known piece of Wotan equipment survives in any museum or archive. The bridge at Macau has long since been rebuilt, its wartime scars erased. Only the cryptic SOE cable, the unexplained hallucinations at Camp 165, and the fleeting resonance heard in the Orzic River ambush remain as clues to a shipment that vanished into the fog of war, and into a category of military research that still defies explanation. In early August 1961, construction crews in what was then the Kaliningrad Oblast of the Soviet Union were clearing the ruins of an abandoned Luftwaffe airfield near the village of Davao. The site, bombed heavily in 1944 and left to decay, was being repurposed for agricultural use when a bulldozer's blade struck reinforced concrete less than 2 meters below the surface. Digging halted as workers uncovered a square steel hatch bolted shut and sealed with a thick layer of asphalt. A faded German placard bolted to the frame read simply, Zutritt nur MIT Genehmigung, Projekt Elysium. Within hours, the area was cordoned off by Soviet military engineers from the 27th Independent Engineer Battalion. Civilian workers were ordered to leave under threat of arrest, and all documentation of the find was confiscated. According to a local woman, whose home overlooked the airfield perimeter, a convoy of unmarked ZIL trucks arrived that night under heavy guard. She reported hearing the screech of metal as the hatch was unsealed, followed by the mechanical whine of a crane operating through the early morning hours. No public record of the operation exists, but declassified NATO intercept logs from a listening station in West Berlin, dated August 9, 1961, captured brief Soviet radio transmissions referencing container logger Elysium and transport to Chelbasi. The latter location, in Krasnodar Krai, housed a Soviet high-altitude aeronautics testing facility, an odd destination if the vault contained only ordinary wartime stores. Fragments of wartime German archives, pieced together from surviving Luftwaffe procurement orders, suggest that Projekt Elysium was initiated in late 1943 under the Reichsluftfahrtministerium's RLM Sonderprojekt Division. The project's lead engineer, Oberstleutnant Erich Voll, specialized in pressurized cockpit systems and long-range reconnaissance aircraft. One memo, retrieved from the RLM's January 1945 production reports, described Langstreckenflug oberhalb der Stratosphäre mit kontinuierlicher Triebwerksleistung, sustained long-distance flight above the stratosphere with continuous engine performance. This was at least 2 decades ahead of what was considered feasible for operational aircraft. Witness accounts from former Luftwaffe ground crew who served in East Prussia during the war recall unmarked hangars at Davao where experimental airframes were kept under canvas and guarded by SS troops rather than Luftwaffe sentries. Some described seeing cylindrical canisters, roughly 2 meters in length, being loaded into aircraft fuselages at night. These canisters, they claimed, bore the same stylized E emblem later seen on the hatch at the airfield vault. What happened inside the vault after the Soviets took control is largely conjecture. A Polish intelligence report from November 1962, obtained by the CIA through an asset in Gdansk, stated that objects resembling large engine nacelles had been moved from Kaliningrad to an undisclosed Siberian location by rail. The report also mentioned 3 crates marked with British shipment codes, implying that not all of Elysium's materials were of German origin. This detail has led some researchers to suspect that Elysium may have incorporated stolen Allied technology, perhaps from captured reconnaissance aircraft or intercepted Lend-Lease deliveries. The mystery deepened in 1977, when a defecting Soviet aeronautical engineer named Yuri Mihailovich Orlov told West German intelligence that he had once examined a German-built pressurized flight module stored at a classified facility outside Novosibirsk. Orlov claimed the module was capable of withstanding flight conditions beyond 75,000 feet, and had been tested without a pilot using remotely controlled throttle and elevator inputs. He described its fuselage skin as lighter than aluminum but impervious to heat distortion, suggesting the use of advanced alloys unknown in the 1940s. Orlov's debriefing notes, released in part in 2005, contain an unsettling line: original documentation in German was incomplete. Several schematics intentionally removed before Soviet acquisition. This raised the possibility that someone, perhaps in the chaotic closing months of the war, had entered the vault before the Red Army arrived and extracted key technical papers, leaving behind only hardware. Satellite imagery of Davao taken in 1965 by the U.S. Corona program shows the airfield's northern section flattened and receded, with no visible trace of the vault entrance. The Soviets appear to have demolished all remaining wartime structures and covered the area with agricultural plots. By the 1980s, only a scattering of concrete fragments along the tree line hinted at the site's former use. In 2014, a group of amateur historians using ground-penetrating radar near the suspected vault location detected large metallic anomalies at a depth of 3 to 4 meters, but their work was halted by local authorities citing unlicensed excavation of a protected site. The equipment was confiscated, and the group received official warnings not to return. Today, no confirmed components from Project Elysium are known to survive in public collections. Its name appears only in fragmentary wartime documents, brief NATO intercepts, and the fading memories of those who once worked at Davao. Whether it represented a practical leap in high-altitude aviation or an abandoned technological dead end, the fact remains that its physical remnants were hidden away, first by the Reich, then by the Soviets, leaving behind a classified void where the truth should be. The steel hatch, the sealed canisters, and the unmarked aircraft are gone, but the question persists: if Elysium was decades ahead of its time, who ensured it would stay buried? Some truths do not fade, they are entombed, waiting for the moment the wrong hands pry them open. What was hidden was never harmless, it was merely patient. In the quiet between wars, these artifacts breathe in the dark, and those who know their weight guard them with silence. But silence decays, and when it breaks, the echoes will not stop where we hope they will.